Good afternoon. My name is John Malloy. I'm the director of the Center for Public Ethics at Martin Luther University College. Welcome to Faithful Election Conversations, Waterloo Region. As we do at all public events at Luther, I want to begin today by acknowledging that Martin Luther University College is located on the Haldimand Tract, the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. This territory is part of the two-row wampum friendship belt and dish with one spoon treaties, commending all to live in peace, stewarding and sharing the resources of this land. This land is also now home to other First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. This land acknowledgement signals Martin Luther University College's commitment to the work of truth and reconciliation, seeking reparation for the harms of colonization. Now, many of you might be familiar with the Center for Public Ethics. Our mandate is to promote dialogue, research, and education on the choices we make together. We believe that one of our roles is to animate faith communities and people of faith to get involved and explore issues, particularly during election periods, which leads us to today's forum, which has two main goals. First, it will be a live all candidates discussion of issues of importance to faith communities and people of faith. And second, our intention is to record today's session and make it available to our network of faith communities, leaders, and others for their use over the coming weeks. Today's forum will follow a simple format. We will explore 4 issues, with each one being introduced by a video message from a local community activist, and each candidate being given an opportunity to respond. At the end of today's session, it will be your turn. You're invited to submit a question for the candidates through the chat function. Finally, I should point out that we invited the 4 main political parties to send representatives to today's session. Unfortunately, the Progressive Conservatives have chosen not to participate. Now, for our moderator today, we're fortunate to have Ken Ogasawara, Communications Specialist with the Mennonite Central Committee. I want to thank Ken for giving so generously of his time, and NCC for lending him to us for the next hour and a half. Over to you, Ken.
Thank you, John. And thank you all for coming. A warm summer welcome to everyone joining us, and especially to our esteemed candidates who are taking the time to spend this time with us. Yes, as John said, my name is Ken Ogasawara. I serve with MCC here in Ontario. And I'd like to introduce our candidates who are with us this afternoon. So we have Laura May Lindo, NDP candidate for Kitchener Centre. We have Jennifer Tuck, who is a Liberal candidate for Waterloo, and Wayne Mack, who is the Green candidate for Kitchener Centre. So yeah, as John said, this first part of the forum will be dealing with sort of 4 key issues of concern to our local faith communities. We'll be showing a video that raises some of these some questions for the candidates, and then each candidate will have 3 minutes to respond. And so, yeah, when you see my face pop up again, I mentioned this to the candidates earlier, but you know you have 30 seconds left, and then if you insist on speaking beyond the 3 minutes, I'll have to jump in there. But so let's just get right to it. Our first topic is poverty, inequality, and climate change. And this question comes from my colleague at MCC, Greg DeGroot-Majetti.
My name is Greg DeGroot-Majetti. I work for Mennonite Central Committee Ontario as a Programs Poverty Associate. I also represent MCC Ontario on the steering committee of ISARC, the Interfaith Social Assistance Reform Coalition, a group of faith communities across Ontario working to end poverty and homelessness. The people living in tents at Victoria and Weaver Streets in downtown Kitchener reveal the stark realities of poverty and homelessness in our community. And their situation is really just the tip of the iceberg, the most visible sign of things. Last fall, Waterloo Region's point in time count found that there were more than 1,000 people experiencing homelessness in the region. This reality is not unique to Waterloo Region. The Financial Accountability Office of Ontario, the FAO, reported on Ontario's housing and homelessness programs last year. They found that with existing programs, the province would not meet the goal of ending chronic homelessness by the target date of 2025. The FAO reported that the number of households in core housing need in Ontario, people spending more than 30% of their gross income on housing, grew from 617,000 to 735,000 between 2011 and 2018. The FAO noted that high housing costs are the main driver of core housing need, impacting more than 90% of households in core housing need. Needless to say, the cost of housing has risen dramatically since 2018. Even taking account of current government investments in affordable housing through the National Housing Strategy, the FAO still forecasts the number of households in core housing need will grow by more than 80,000 in the next 5 years. When someone's in core housing need, they are more vulnerable to losing their housing and becoming homeless if a crisis occurs. It's clear we need more housing, and particularly affordable rental housing. But we also need to preserve the existing stock of affordable rental housing. Ontario has no rent controls when units become vacant, and this has opened the door to large real estate investment trusts who have bought up apartment buildings and systematically increased rents. What will your party do to preserve existing affordable rental housing? How will your party reduce the number of people living in core housing need in Ontario? And what will your party do to end chronic homelessness in Ontario? A root cause of poverty in Ontario is low incomes, and particularly for people who rely on Ontario Works and the Ontario Disability Support Program. There are more than 900,000 Ontarians relying on OW and ODSP. Currently, a single adult on OW receives a maximum of $914 a month, and someone on ODSP receives $1,350 a month. And that includes both the basic needs and housing allowance and all available federal and provincial tax credits. That leaves people relying on OW with incomes less than 50% of the poverty line, and those on ODSP with incomes less than 75% of the official poverty line across Ontario, the market basket measure. It leaves them without enough money to pay their rent and afford food and other essentials. And those rates have been frozen since 2018, even as the cost of living is rising rapidly, so people are falling even deeper into poverty. What will your party do to raise the incomes of people relying on Ontario Works and ODSP? Will you index social assistance rates to the cost of living? And what steps will your party take to ensure that everyone in Ontario has enough income to live above the poverty line? Thank you.
Thank you, Greg, for that excellent question. I should note that I accidentally added climate change as part of this poverty and inequality topic, which was my mistake. This topic is big enough on its own, and we will address climate change and the climate crisis as its own topic next. So this is about poverty and inequality. Thank you, Greg, for that excellent primer. So we'll now hear from our candidates, and I'll just note that we'll switch up the order in which we hear from our candidates after each round. So for this one, let's go Laura May, and then Jennifer, and then Wayne, and then after each response, I will cue the next speaker. So Laura May, go ahead. You're up. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for starting off with such an important question. The chronic homelessness crisis is something that's been ongoing for quite some time, and the history of it makes it quite difficult to come up with a solution immediately. But what we do know is that with the rising cost of living, having a guaranteed basic income is hugely, hugely important as part of that solution to address chronic homelessness and the housing crisis. So right before the writ dropped, I had actually drafted a bill for guaranteed livable basic income that was tailor-made to support the work of my federal counterpart and very good friend of mine, MP Leah Gazan, who had also been working on a national strategy for guaranteed basic income. I wasn't able to table the bill solely because the writ dropped and the election began, but the legislation has actually passed through the legislative lawyers to make sure that everything is in order. And my hope is that if I'm reelected, that I'm able to continue that fight. There's been a lot of discussion about raising the rates for ODSP and OW recipients. I can tell you, as the former MPP in Kitchener Centre, the bulk of the calls coming into my office were around issues related to being on ODSP and OW and not being able to keep up with the cost of living, whether it's buying food, paying your rent, because the rental prices were increasing dramatically. So what the party has done is sort of twofold. On the first part, the commitment is to immediately increase ODSP and OW rates to where they should have been had we formed a government, and those increases would continue. So they're saying it's approximately 20% increase. There's been a lot of tension around the 20% increase because the cost of living just keeps going up, even as we're saying this is what we're going to increase first. So I wanted to note that on the very last day that the Legislative Assembly was sitting, a number of the members from the NDP, and actually Mike Schreiner as well from the Green Party, were listening to ODSP and OW recipients and to anti-poverty advocates who were literally gathered outside of Queen's Park. And we were tabling petitions to the current government asking for a minimum of $2,000 a month for ODSP and OW recipients. I think it's really important to note that those petitions matter because that's actually the advocates on the ground who are telling us exactly what it is that they need. And so those are some of the important starting points that we're going to take alongside a poverty reduction strategy, which would include addressing housing costs and cost of living across the board. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Laura May. Jennifer, you are up next. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Also, I agree, very important question to start us off on this. I just want to, I guess I'll start by saying that within my family, I have personal experience with a close family member who's had mental health addiction issues and has oftentimes been homeless. So I can absolutely appreciate how difficult it is for those that are living in those conditions. And certainly it's a passion of mine to try and reform the system so that, you know, everyone has the right to live on a livable wage or on proper support programs and receive the care and support that they need from various community agencies. In the Liberal platform, I am pleased to see that they've included 138,000 deeply affordable housing units, with 78,000 of them dedicated for social and community homes with support. I know that from my experience would go a long way towards helping my family member. Also, they're looking to expand all types of affordable housing so that it's not just looking at one specific sector, but building mixed use housing so that communities are also integrated and they have the support of the community there. I think the other piece around a livable wage is important as well. So on our platform commitment, we are going to raise minimum wage to $16 an hour, January 1st, 2023, if elected, obviously, and work towards a livable wage by region. So, I mean, some parts of the province are more expensive to live in than others. And I think that needs to be reflected in our minimum wage, but I think it needs to be rebranded from minimum to livable. As the speaker noted, it's very difficult to get by on just minimum wage. And in terms of ODSP and OW, agreed that the rates are currently way too low I see firsthand, my family member does live on ODSP, and I see firsthand how difficult it is for him to make ends meet, and how oftentimes he goes without because he doesn't have the resources to support himself appropriately. So the Liberals have committed to raising ODSP by 20% overall. The first tranche would be 10% by July 1st, I believe, and then another 20 or 10% by 2023. And we're also committed to raising OW rates by 10%. I'm also personally very supportive of a universal basic income concept, and the Liberals have committed to bringing back the pilot project that was canceled when the Ford government came into power in 2018. So bringing that project back to really study the impacts it can have on the lives of those that receive it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Jennifer, for your thoughtful answer as well. Wayne, you're up next.
All right, hello everyone. And yeah, just echoing on the other two, like how we protect our most vulnerable is so important, and how we should be as a society. Particularly with the encampment at Victoria and Weaver is really, I find, like a symptom of a much greater problem of many facets of society, essentially. So what we'd like is to provide permanent supportive housing. The Green Party is a huge fan of housing first strategy with mental health supports wrapped around that. So we can give everyone a good foundation, a stable place to call home while they're able to access those services. So that includes 60,000 permanent supportive housing working directly with nonprofits. In this area, that would some great examples of some amazing work being done here is the House of Friendship and the WKW, who've done some excellent work, and we'd love to upload a lot of that cost to the provincial level, so it's not such a burden on our municipalities and regions, so we can all work together. And we would also take advantage of the housing strategy, but on top of that, not just building, but the operating costs, which sometimes gets lost in the noise, but we need to help these nonprofit organizations to continue to help others and help everyone succeed. With Ontario Works and ODSP, the housing allowance currently is $497. I was talking to an outreach worker, and that can't even get you a single room in the entire region of Waterloo. We want to raise it to somewhere where the poverty line exists today, and that would be double, and we'd want to tie that to increases in inflation, just as a starting point, so they can live a life with dignity. We would probably want to look at how these programs are built and see if we can structure them to better help the people who are, who need these services. But I hope that we continue to champion basic income as well, because I believe it's a great start to giving everyone that foundation to, live more enriching, fulfilling lives and be able to be connected to their communities. Because I believe that's the kind of society we want in our future, where we can all help each other. And I really hope that's how we as a society want to move forward in Canada. I guess that's what I have to say on that one.
Thank you, Wayne. Appreciate it. We'll now move to our next topic. Oh, I should also mention here, again, if you have questions that you'd want the candidates to follow up on at the end during our Q&A session, yeah, again, you can throw your questions into the chat at any point, and we'll just be collecting those throughout this event. Our next topic is the climate crisis, and this question comes to us from Laura Hamilton, who is a community organizer around climate change, and let's hear from Laura.
Hi, my name's Laura Hamilton, and I'm a community organizer around climate change. I do this work through an organization called Divest Waterloo. We're the local chapter of the national interfaith organization called Faith and the Common Good. In May 2019, a UN report was released that warned that without a radical reordering of society away from runaway consumption, the planet faces irreversible calamity. 1 million species are on the brink, and human survival depends on these species. Last month, the third and final section of the IPCC's latest comprehensive review of climate science was released, drawing on the work of thousands of scientists. IPCC reports take about 7 years to complete, making this potentially the last warning before the world is set irrevocably on a path to irreversible climate breakdown. This provincial election creates a powerful opportunity for us to collectively demonstrate that it is the love that we have for each other and our love for creation and for peace that compels us to take action on climate change, action commensurate with the scale of this crisis. The stakes have never been higher, with expert opinion estimating that we have less than a decade remaining, only 2 full election cycles in which to avoid a runaway climate crisis. It is no longer acceptable for any government going forward to address the environmental issues that threaten us all. As a candidate for the next provincial government, if elected, you will be responsible and accountable for achieving the critically urgent, massive transformational changes necessary to secure a livable future for all Ontarians. It is clear that we need transformation at a systems level. To avoid the worst consequences of a climate change requires fundamentally rethinking a broad range of assumptions that we value. How we deploy capital, the rules set by governments and markets, the people and interests we prioritize, and the kind of future we want. This change will require thinking big and making bold moves. That said, while we all want action on climate change, few of us want inconvenience. And we know that people that have demonstrated some element of lifestyle change, like flying less, eating less meat, or driving less, are more likely to take climate change issues seriously. And so my first question is, what substantive changes have you made in your own life? And what system change should the next provincial government prioritize? The chair of the IPCC has made it clear that there must be a 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 to avoid the most catastrophic consequences of climate change. The cumulative scientific evidence is unequivocal. Any further delay in global action on adaptation and mitigation will miss a brief and rapidly closing window of opportunity to secure livable and sustainable future for all. Over 1 billion citizens now live in over 2,000 jurisdictions worldwide that have, in recognition that this window is quickly closing, declared a climate emergency, like Waterloo Region, where all of our area municipalities have made comparable declarations and unanimously committed to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2030. So what will you and your party do to support Waterloo Region and municipalities across Ontario to achieve this target? The 2019 report that I referenced earlier goes on to say that sustainable economic development must include protection for biodiversity and natural ecosystems. Ontario had one of the strongest endangered species laws in the world. However, in recent years, this has been dangerously eroded. Lately, there have been several extensive provincial consultations on expanding the Greenbelt to better protect farmland, water, natural ecosystems, and biodiversity facing development threats. What would you and your party do to protect Ontario's biodiversity and ecosystems? What is your party's response to these consultations? And how do you plan to ensure adequate protection in the years ahead?
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Laura, for voicing this issue so forcefully and eloquently. Yeah, obviously a lot there to go through. Let's hear from our candidates. For this round, we'll go Jennifer, and then Wayne, and then Laura May. So Jennifer, go ahead, you're up. You got 3 minutes.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for that question. Also, another very important question, and one that is very close to my heart. I believe her first remark was what we've done in our own personal lives to try and reduce our own carbon footprint. And I can say that for about 2.5 years, I was a vegetarian. I've since introduced a little bit of chicken into my diet, but I still try to live mostly a plant-based have mostly a plant-based diet, and we try to use public transit and reduce our carbon footprint at home as much as possible. And something I believe in and keep trying to find further actions I can take to reduce my environmental imprint. Like the region of Waterloo's target, the Liberal platform also calls for 50% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Our transit plan is one of the centerpieces of our platform, and it calls for $1 transit rides up until 2024. And that particular plank of our platform it touches on many different parts of your life. I mean, it helps with affordability, bringing costs down to transport yourself around the region, but also will help with reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And there's also a pledge to protect 30% of Ontario's lands, which is up from the current 10% protection, and expand the Greenbelt, working alongside community organizations and the agricultural community to ensure that farmland is protected. It includes more oversight for conservation authorities to, again, also include farmers in that discussion and to protect lands for agriculture. We hope to plant 8 million trees over 8 years, 100 million trees per year, to increase the green canopy. And when it comes to energy production, which is something I also know fairly well, as I spent 10 years working in the renewable energy industry, there's a commitment to ban new natural gas-fired plants and reduce our reliance on existing natural gas facilities as well, and do this by increasing our renewable penetration and pursuing a green hydrogen economy as well, which those measures taken together will not only improve the environment, but create about 25,000 green jobs, which are well-paying jobs for the communities across Ontario. There's also, I think I've touched on all my topics, so I maybe don't need the whole 3 minutes.
Thank you, Jennifer. No one begrudges a speaker who cuts their speech short, so that's no worries. You got it all in there. It's awesome. Thank you. And Wayne, you are next.
Thank you very much. And as you can imagine, this topic is close to the heart of many Greens in our party. Part of the Transform Waterloo Region strategy is reducing these 50% reduction in emissions by 2030 and 80% by 2050. Like personally, I can walk, and I'm lucky enough to live in an area that has designed their community that's walkable, that where taking public transit is viable. But I am a true believer that reduction of emissions needs to be happening on a systemic industrial scale, something wider. And what we really want to do is if we want to try to electrify everything we can, we got a very low carbon energy mix. So redirecting funding away from sprawl infrastructure and more investing in infrastructure that encourages this reduction in emissions. Locally, that would include a lot of grants and incentives for small and medium businesses to help with that transition. In Waterloo Region itself, a lot of our emissions come from transportation and heating buildings. So building incentives for heat pumps in our buildings. There's an outfit locally in Cambridge that's able to get heat pumps working it down to minus 50 degrees Celsius. Let's encourage that. Let's create good local jobs to help with this transition. Let's build better transportation options to connect our communities with electrified public transportation, encourage active transportation. A lot of that would go a long way to 50% by 2030 in our region alone. In terms of our protecting our environment, we like it. We want to recognize and support Indigenous protected and conserved areas, and directly fund Indigenous stewardship because they really know the lands well. And we want to put priority on protecting biodiversity hotspots. A good example is peatlands. They have a lot of carbon stored in them, and we want those protections without any exemptions for forestry and mining. It was mentioned before, an expansion of the green belt. We call it the blue belt. Specifically, we want to help protect our waterways and watersheds, and this would include the Gulch Moraine. It would include the watersheds of the Grand and Nith River in our regions, because these places are a big part of our biodiversity. Our marshes filter our water and protect us against flooding. So strategies like that to help make sure that we don't destroy our environment and the things we love the most. Really what I'm hoping for is really thinking about a future where we live in 15-minute communities where everything we want is within 15 minutes where we work, where our communities are, where we interact with each other, and trying to change that framework so more holistic community that we're all closely tied to can be better for the environment and our emissions overall.
Thank you, Wayne. And finally, Laura May, go ahead.
Thank you so much. And again, another important question. My starting point is this. I don't think that we can address the climate crisis unless we also center reconciliation with Indigenous communities. As Wayne was saying prior, they have been the stewards of the land, the water, the air, and there's wisdom and knowledge there that can allow us to think differently about the ways that we govern in this space. And so when I think about the first part of Laura's question about what I have done personally, part of it has been using my position of influence to put forward the advocacy that's been happening on the ground locally. So for example, every time one of the municipalities has tabled a motion and passed a motion around climate justice, climate change advocacy, they often CC a member of provincial parliament or the members in the area. So I take that, I either incorporated it into speeches to get it to the government, wrote letters to the government alongside it to make sure that they knew that locally this is what we're fighting for. I think centering the voices of youth advocates is also really important because there's a very interesting bit of advocacy that's happening as more and more of our students who are our future leaders are understanding the urgency with which we have to address climate change and the climate crisis. So we have committed to having a youth corps that would be able to provide action on the ground with government. We've also committed to cut emissions at the minimum 50% by 2030 with the bigger, bolder goal of having Ontario net zero by 2050. That means that new builds, we have to make sure that they're retrofit to support this goal. And what that also means is that any piece of legislation that flows through the House, should we form government, has to have a climate lens attached. That includes houses that we're building, going back to the first question, that includes retrofitting homes that exist now, that includes ensuring that government provides the supports to the municipalities to electrify, whether it's their local transportation, electrifying the GO, making sure that we have two-way all-day GO, which has been something that we've been fighting for in Kitchener for quite some time. And also, as far as I am concerned personally, it means speaking to the experts and being led by the experts. I would never profess to be a knower of all things climate, and that's also something that I've had to do, is to learn because of that importance. But the science and the scientists and the advocates on the ground have to lead the charge, and we are ready to listen and do the work.
Thank you, Laura May. And thank you all of you for responding to that existential question. Yeah, big challenge there. Our next topic is healthcare, which includes the issue of long-term care. And this question comes to us from Dr. Peter Kunert, who is a local physician and Lutheran pastor.
Good afternoon. My name is Reverend Dr. Peter Kunert. I'm an ordained minister in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Canada and a hospitalist physician working primarily in long-term psychiatric care in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario. As someone who's worked in healthcare for over 30 years and more than 10 years in healthcare in Ontario, I thought long and hard about our common vision for healthcare and healthcare reform. Thinking about this today takes me back to the Romano Commission of 2002, which recommended establishing a healthcare covenant for Canadians to establish a common language and an ethical groundwork for healthcare conversations amongst Ontarians and Canadians. And of course, around the same time, the Canadian Council of Churches put forward their own vision for a healthcare covenant for all Canadians. My question for candidates today is, what is your vision for how we have a conversation about healthcare reform, and what are the ethical principles that ground that conversation for all Ontarians. My second reflections for today revolve around the stress of the system that we have experienced through the last 2 years of the COVID pandemic. We have had 2 full hospital beds. Sometimes there's hospital corridor medicine happening. All my colleagues, whether they are allied healthcare staff, nursing staff, medical staff, express significant fatigue. And this is after 2 years of the pandemic, and we're worried how we're going to manage should there be future waves of COVID in the next couple of years. So my second question for the candidates today is, what is your vision for funding and providing adequate resources for healthcare in Ontario over the next term of the next provincial government? Third area of concern has, of course, been what's been happening in our long-term care system in the last 2 years. We have been newly aware of the mortality issues related to COVID and the issues about access to adequate care in the midst of the pandemic. It's been suggested that some of the issues in long-term care are linked with the increased privatization of long-term care beds in Ontario. Currently, my understanding is about 58% of long-term care beds are in private for-profit care homes. And an issue with for-profit care homes is that up to a quarter of their income from government funding and residential fees goes to profits for shareholders rather than providing care for people in their beds, or for providing excellent remuneration for the staff working in those homes. My questions for the candidates today is, what is your vision for long-term care homes in Ontario in the next decade? Do you support increasing municipal and not-for-profit ownership, or do you and your party support increasing privatization of these resources that are required for all our families, grandparents, parents, friends, and neighbors as they age? And finally, my last question is around creeping privatization in healthcare. We've seen this most recently in the privatization of COVID-19 testing since December 2021. Prior to that time, all Ontarians could get publicly provided and funded COVID-19 testing. Now there are, I think, up to 17 providers charging up to $200 per test for most Ontarians. My question for the candidates today is, what is your vision for ongoing public provision and administration of the healthcare system in Ontario, or do you support increasing privatization of these resources? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kunert, for those reflections around an issue that has always been of prominent importance in Canada and in Ontario, but especially in recent years, of course, as the pandemic has affected all of us, and especially our healthcare system. So for this round, we'll hear from Wayne first, and then Laura May, and then Jennifer. So Wayne, go ahead, you've got your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. This is really close to my heart because in this region, I am a software specialist for medical information systems. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. I'll try to keep this down to 3 minutes. But the overall themes is I want a more caring Ontario. That's the kind of future that I want. And a lot of that involves investing in people, investing in our healthcare workers. I'm sure a lot of us are not a huge fan of Bill 124, and all of us want to get rid of it immediately. But in terms of what I see going forward, I can see a much more connected healthcare infrastructure system within Ontario, where you don't need to carry discs around to different specialists, but your patient history is available to specialists to have a complete picture of your entire history, and so they can make better decisions on diagnoses and treatment plans because the different regions would be talking to each other electronically. You would have that entire patient history. And that's where I really see that healthcare reform going into the future. We need a pair of staff. We need a pair of staff. It's really like that. They really are the people providing us the healthcare, and they have the knowledge, and we should be treating them like with the experience that they have. Part of our long-term care strategy officially as the Greens is that we wouldn't license any more new for-profit. We would that would be a thing of the past. We want because it's really hard to see that for-profit model with a caring community on long-term care, especially since we have a large aging population who will need these facilities more. I've worked in Denmark, and I've really seen how they have aging in place initiatives. And I think taking lessons learned from different jurisdictions, because a lot of jurisdictions have gone through similar experiences before, bringing those lessons learned into our frame of reference, like putting health through a preventative lens, I think would go a long way to improving all of our qualities of lives. With long-term care, the current system is a lot of long-term care facilities aren't empowered to hire their own staff. They're forced to go through temporary agencies. And when there's a sudden increase in funding that is needed, it typically goes into these temporary agencies. So I would love to empower long-term care facilities to enable them to hire their own staff, to provide stable work with the same quality of care. You would have the same patients, interacting with the same PSWs, and helping long-term care facilities really grow the careers of the people that they employ. With the current system, a lot of the temporary agencies don't guarantee hours. The PSWs themselves are being bounced around different facilities, and the long-term care facilities themselves are not even quite sure who they have brought in to help care for their patients. So empowering long-term care facilities to have the ability to, work and train their own staff, I think would go a long way. Overall, though, let's think of a future that is more caring, and that means investing in people, and that means investing in our healthcare workers.
Thank you, Wayne. Laura May, you're up.
Thank you so much. I just have to say, I love the love in this room right now, because I think that is so important. So for the NDP, we've long been fighting to take profits out of the long-term care system, out of healthcare. If you're worried about making more money and giving money to shareholders, so that's definitely part of the plan. Investing in the not-for-profit and public healthcare system. I also think it's really important for us to recognize that in the region, we have one of the largest newcomer populations. Many people that come here who have been healthcare workers, nurses, PSWs, doctors from back home. So part of our platform is also to increase the number of internationally trained healthcare staff to help us with the nursing shortage, with the healthcare shortage. I know in my office a number of people find family doctors, which would allow them the preventative care that they need, and would take some of that burden off of the system. I also think it's really important for us to start to think about our healthcare system more broadly. There seems to be a history of separating out mental health from your physical health, but mentally with our mental health strategy in the platform that brings all of the mental health supports under OHIP, so that we don't have people waiting forever to try and cobble together enough money to be able to get some of the mental health supports that they need. I also think it's important for us to look at the social determinants of health. And so I can't separate out this topic of healthcare without also thinking about things like poverty reduction strategies, ensuring that we've got community care available and accessible to folks, recognizing that racism has a mental health and a physical health impact. It's why I tabled a motion actually while I was at Queen's Park, asking the government to recognize that anti-Black racism is a public health crisis. If you are going into hospitals and they are making racist assumptions about why you are in crisis, you are denied healthcare. And so we've got to make sure that there is an understanding across the board that those social determinants of health have a broader impact on the way that you can live and thrive in community. I think the last thing I'll say in my last 30 seconds is that what the pandemic also revealed was something that we found 10 years ago with the poverty by postal code research that was being done with the Liberal government. The hotspots from the pandemic are those same areas. So we've got to invest in community.
Thank you, Laura May. Jennifer, you're up next with your 3 minutes.
Thank you. It's nice to see that the three parties actually have a lot of commonalities between them on this topic of healthcare. I agree so much with what Laura May was saying. The social determinants of healthcare are huge and have hugely impactful to the system and cost a lot of money. I mean, just going back to our earlier discussion on poverty reduction and affordable housing, I mean, you're looking at people that potentially have addiction and mental health issues that are also experiencing homelessness. Their health needs are going to be physical health and mental health needs are going to be considerably higher than somebody who has a more stable living situation. So I think the holistic view of the healthcare system is really important. Looking at things like affordable housing and contributing, having someone living in an affordable housing unit with supports in place will help help ensure better mental health and physical health outcomes. We, the Liberal Party, believe strongly in public healthcare. We would move away from privatization and ensuring that the public system is well funded and supported and able to meet the needs of Ontarians. That would include hiring 100,000 new nurses and doctors and other medical staff. And we do that through a $1 billion investment that would first work to tackle the backlog of surgeries and diagnostic testing that was put off because of COVID. So working to make sure that those people that are currently waiting for surgeries are able to access that. We would have to invest in that. In terms of mental health, it's obviously something that hits very close to home for me. And I definitely believe there needs to be more funding available and more, to the earlier conversation, more wraparound supports, because it's not just an isolated condition that you can treat with just a pill. I mean, certainly medication is absolutely helpful, but there needs to be more of a holistic approach to that. So there needs to be other treatment options also available to go along with the medical medicine that they take as well. In terms of long-term care, I think certainly we've seen the ravages the pandemic has had on our seniors that have been in the long-term care facilities, not only from the physical impacts of COVID, but also the mental health issues associated with being locked down and isolation and kept away from their family members and friends and other support networks. So we would work towards making all long-term care homes private or public, rather. I misspoke. We would be making them public and aim to do that by 2028. And we also want to look at different ways of delivering seniors care. So ensuring everyone has access to home care and can maintain an independent lifestyle for as long as they choose is also an important part of our platform.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you all for your responses on this topic. Our fourth and final topic is advancing racial equality for Indigenous, Black, and other racialized communities in Ontario. This question is brought to us by Fazia Mazar, who's the Executive Director of the Coalition of Muslim Women, KW.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fazia Mazhar. I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition of Muslim Women of KW. I also serve as a member of the Region of Waterloo Anti-Racism Advisory Working Group. As we know, racial inequities have existed in our communities across Ontario forever. However, many recent events have forced us collectively to urgently move the needle on the issue of racial inequities. In addition, against the backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have seen a rising tide of racism, including anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-Asian racism. Recent events, such as the horrific Islamophobic attack in London, sadly serve as a constant reminder that there is more work to be done to build fully inclusive communities in Ontario. It is critical for our communities to continue to push for a government in Ontario that is committed to addressing all forms of systemic racism, including Islamophobia, and advancing racial equity across the province. So my first question to you all is, how is your party going to advance racial equality in Ontario? My second question to you is about the racial discrimination in the education system. We know that the Black and Indigenous students face limited access to equitable opportunities, ensuring equal outcomes for all students in Ontario schools, while Black and Indigenous educators face isolation and discrimination. If elected, what would you and or your party do to ensure racial justice and equitable opportunities for Black and Indigenous learners and educators in the Ontario education system? My third question to you is about the London Family Act. The entire nation was horrified at the hate exhibited when the Afzal family was brutally murdered on June 6, 2021. In the wake of this tragedy, leaders of all major political parties acknowledged the presence of Islamophobia and its harmful effects on Canadian Muslims, pledging to take action against it. However, Ontario's legislature failed to pass the proposed Bill 86, which is commonly known as our London Family Act, before it dissolved for the June 2nd elections. If passed, this act would require a provincial review of hate crimes and hate-motivated incidents in Ontario. It will create safe zones around religious centers, and it will give new tools to educators to fight racism in schools. What will you and your party do to support this act being passed if elected? Thank you to the Center for Public Ethics for organizing this candidates forum and giving me the opportunity to ask a few important questions.
Thank you, Fawzia, for introducing this important topic for us. And yeah, I love seeing this on the agenda. This last round will go in this order: Laura May, and then Jennifer, and then Wayne. So Laura, you're up first. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this important question. I'm going to start backwards. So within our platform, Bill 86, our London Families Act, would get passed right away. We were fighting very, very hard at Queen's Park to try and ensure that it got passed before the writ dropped. Unfortunately, the government, though they said that they were ready to do it, did a couple things sort of within the system to not follow through before the writ dropped. So that's one in our platform is one of the starting points should we form government. When it comes to education, some of the education pieces are actually part of Bill 86. So it's important to note that by passing Bill 86, addressing Islamophobia in education would also be something that that would be addressed from a government's perspective. But I also had tabled Bill 67, the Racial Equity in Education Act, which for 3 glorious days, people were very excited about until other folks who were worried about what it would mean to address racism in schools decided to, and they kept fighting, and we kept our head. Bill would also be one that we would be fighting for to ensure is in law. At the time that I tabled it, just so that folks know, it got near all party support, which is fantastic. And I'm quite excited about that. Bill 67 would provide a strategy to address racism from kindergarten to grade 12 and throughout post-secondary. Oftentimes we forget that our educational experience doesn't necessarily end at grade 12, and that some of the experiences of racism would continue throughout your post-secondary career. So that act is exciting. The other piece that I'd like to just throw out there, and I'm happy to share links to this, very early on, the NDP tabled a policy paper or wrote a policy paper called End Police Violence, Invest in Black, Indigenous, and Racialized Lives. That document provided a bit of a strategic example of what would happen if we imagined a community where upstream supports were invested in, as opposed to investing huge amounts of dollars in policing, which is a reactive entity within government. I think it's really important to emphasize that, because it's actually something that Wayne had mentioned about the need to prevent health crises and prevent harm. If we don't start seeing our government responsibilities in that preventative lens, or through that preventative lens, I don't know how we're ever going to do anything but add Band-Aid upon Band-Aid in gaping wounds within our system. And so I do think it's important for folks to take a peek at that and get a sense of why it is so important to connect those investments in mental health, in housing, in job access to good. They're talking about doing anti-racist work in community. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Laura. Jennifer, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you. This is, I think, a good question on which to end the this round of the conversation. It's very important as well. A couple things I wanted to talk about, and sort of builds on what Laura May was saying in terms of, in the wraparound care approach to looking at healthcare, poverty, and affordable housing. The other piece too is the justice system. And you look at, I think I read the other day that Indigenous women now make up 50% of the population of women in incarceration in Canada. And I mean, that's horrifying. And there needs to be more done to address issues like that. And I think a lot of it stems from racism and discrimination that they experience throughout their lives that lead them to where they run out of options, perhaps, and end up in the criminal justice system. So in our platform, we are looking at improving training for police officers, ensuring that they have mental health training in addition to anti-racism training as part of their programming when they're in school, looking at hiring more underrepresented communities to be police officers as well. So there is some sense of, it's not just a bunch of older white men that are carrying around those duties. So to try and change the face of policing a little bit. We're also committed to reconciliation with our Indigenous partners and making that mandatory learning in schools so that we are all aware of that part of our past, and it's not something that can be glossed over or forgotten about. There's also support for teaching First Nations languages and cultures, and making the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation a statutory holiday. Similar to the NDP platform, I guess you got further because they actually introduced the bill in the legislature, but we are also proposing our London Family Act that would create new tools and strategies to combat racism. And we would also appoint a standalone minister, if elected, to be responsible specifically for anti-racism issues, and making it easier to report instances of racism in the social services sector, within schools, within healthcare, so that there are ways and a path forward to investigate those issues. There's also some money set aside to fund other issues sort of running around that, around racism. I just don't need to get into all the details because I see my 30-second nod is coming. So thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wayne, we'll hand it off to you for the last word on this topic.
All right, thank you very much. And a very important topic. I'll start bottom up as well. Our London Family Act, we support it. And a lot of the candidates, the Green candidates I had the pleasure of meeting, also really want it passed. So just to make it clear, we want to pass our Ontario Family Act. Some of the parts that we want to bring in is also restoring legal aid funding that was cut in the previous administration. So we would want everyone to have equal access to the justice system. So that includes restoring that aiding and boosting that legal aid. But a lot of it is, future forward. We want to invest in upstream services, in community services, in culturally appropriate services, because that is how we can really change how our society can look in the future. If everyone has access to anti-racism tools, if they can recognize it, everyone is living in a world where diversity, equity, and inclusion is in the mindset at the education level, I think it would go a long way to make a more caring society. There are other parts that the Greens would like as well. For example, for Indigenous communities, we'd really want Indigenous-led welfare, child welfare providers, just to address the overrepresentation of Indigenous children in provincial care. We would like more training because a part of that is the education component, right? And helping people see, the inequalities all around us. Yeah, and sorry, part of it is also giving communities kind of a level playing field. We'd want more green spaces in all of our communities, building communities in mind when we build new places, or even changing existing places. Continuing $10 a day childcare, that would go a long way to providing a little bit more equity to everyone in our community. Yeah, we would want a Pay Transparency Act, so people can actually see, and it's transparent, what jobs entail and what the wages would be, and it can't be hidden under secrecy. It would be transparent for all, and I think that would go a long way towards the different inequalities that we see. But really, I think the overarching theme is we want that preventative part. We want to invest in those upstream community services, and that really is the best way we feel to address a huge part of the societal shift that we would like to see. A lot of the stuff that we promised towards the end can be smoothing over cracks, but we really want to fix the foundation and look at the root causes of why this inequity exists in the first place. That's my time.
Thank you, Wayne, and thanks to all of you for responding to all these issues. That's a lot of ground covered and a lot of right to process, and a lot of to pack into just 3-minute responses. So I appreciate all of you for stepping up to that challenge, and also a big thank you to our community leaders who posed these excellent questions and brought us these issues. We are now moving to the Q&A section of our time here. So we've got some questions from the floor, and interestingly enough, some of these questions are following sort of our last theme around racial equality. And so I'll ask this question, and just so you are a heads up, we'll go Jennifer, Wayne, and then Laura for this question. And because we're doing pretty well on time, you guys have all been really great about sticking within 3 minutes. So we had originally scheduled a minute per answer. We'll extend that to 90 seconds. What a generous offer there. So 90 seconds for these questions here, and we've got a bunch. So the first question is, kind of piggybacking on the last question that we talked about. If we want to change the way things are being in quotes, where the traditional mainstream powerful white Eurocentered Christian voices continue to dominate, what would your party do to bring a less heard, marginalized presence to all these issues? And who did I say first? Jennifer, go ahead.
I apologize. The purulator truck is outside and my dogs are losing their mind. So I apologize for the barking that's about to ensue. And I actually missed part of the question because they were so loud.
Sure. Sorry. And no, you can't control purulator or the dog sometimes. That's totally cool. The question is, if we want to change the way things are, the status quo, insofar as the traditional power centers being, white Eurocentered Christian voices, what would your party do to bring up the voices of the marginalized, of those who have been kind of marginalized in the past?
I mean, some of the things I touched on in my response, certainly the path forward on reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples, ensuring that there's mandatory education in schools. I really believe that education is one of the best ways to create a level playing field. Kids aren't born to hate. They don't see color, they don't see disabilities when they're young. And I think we just need to find ways to keep that happening so that, as they age, they don't lose that. So I think having those pieces in the public education system are incredibly important. And I think you augment that with, education on racism and on, just letting the white Eurocentric folks know that they have an immense amount of privilege. I recognize that by accident of birth, I've had a lot of privilege in my life that I took for granted for many, many years because I didn't understand that I had it. And so, I've had to learn that as an adult. And I think that it would be, better if kids were taught that at a younger age, and within our publicly funded school systems is a place to do that. I think hiring more, or encouraging, actually not hiring, but encouraging more, ethnic minority people to run for public office. I mean, I think it's great that we have such a wealth of candidates here from different backgrounds. And I think we need to encourage that, because if your government looks like your population, you're going to get a lot better policies that reflect the differences between us and focuses on what brings us together rather than what divides us.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wayne, you're up next.
Yeah, just to echo on that previous point, representation matters. Having different people's voices as not just part of the conversation really, but even like shaping the conversation. I'm very fortunate and grateful that the Green Party, I wanted to be there, I put my hat in the ring. The Green Party has allowed me to run and also be a voice at the conversation at a party level. And I really appreciate that. With some of the experiences in my life I can bring in. Sorry. So having more people in and able to not just be there, but to shape the conversation with their own life experiences. We can also help with that in communities, because if we develop very robust, safe third spaces, communities can flourish. It would be a place where people can regularly visit and be able to really instill where they are in the world and where they are in society by having these places that are not just work and home, but places where your community thrives. And last point, education is a big part, because if everyone has those tools in their toolkit and can see racism and take steps to dismantle it, education, that's a huge step to changing, I guess, the makeup of the voices that dictate the decisions. And there will be pressure in order to see that representation. The more that is involved and the more that people see that, it really has knock-on effects. And I think we're seeing a lot of that in the last few years already. So that's how I see we would change that, the anchoring of that perspective over time.
Thank you, Wayne. And Laura May, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I think addressing white supremacy takes courageous policies and bold steps, and most importantly, love. And a lot of people think that to do anti-racist work, love isn't really a big important thing, but you've got to love your community and this province enough to have the courage to table other policies. I'm also just going to shake things up a little bit, because it's how I roll. I rabble rouse. So here's some rabble rousing. White supremacy is embedded in the systems. And so no matter what representation you have at the table, as much as we still have to fight for that, I totally agree. If we keep doing the same thing in those systems, you're just going to have Black, Brown, and Indigenous people that are perpetuating anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, Islamophobia, et cetera. And so part of it is having us there to be able to point out the ways that the systems are perpetuating racism. So that means we've got to be at Queen's Park, because if we have that lens, then we need to be able to speak boldly and courageously about that in the chamber. We also have to be in committee hearings. So when bills are going through the process and community is being asked to comment, you need to make sure that that information is being brought to the less represented communities so they come out and talk about the impact of those bills. And that piece is something that we can do right now, no matter who is elected in government.
Thank you, Laura May, and thanks to all of you for jumping on that question. This next one will take a bit. Whoops, sorry, my timer. Excuse me. So this next question is a much more specific one, and it speaks to greenhouse gas emissions and housing. So this question says, there are opportunities in Ontario's building code to make homes and other structures more energy efficient, but developers might resist these changes, arguing that increasing standards under the code would increase the cost of home ownership. Is your party advocating to improve standards in the building code, and how would you respond to the argument that improved standards would increase the cost of home ownership? Let's go Laura, Jennifer, and then Wayne for this one. Laura May, sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Again, I think this is about bold policies and bold leadership. If we don't have a planet, then the cost of living is going to be a non-issue. If we don't have the air that we breathe and clean access to clean drinking water and a planet that is thriving and a Mother Earth that is holding us, then it doesn't really matter about the cost of building these houses. And so I think if that is your starting point, then yes, you will make the changes to the building codes and you will demand that the people that are doing the building follow through, because that's part of what our job is. Sometimes we resist things in anticipation that nobody wants to do the right thing. But if bold leadership shows up and says, we love each other so much that we are going to hold each other with care, and then you make the changes to the building code, you would be surprised at how many people just do the right thing and do the, for us, if we were in government and we're putting money on the table to invest in retrofitting homes, then people will follow through and do that. But if we start as leaders in community from a place of, oh, everyone's going to resist this because capitalism forces them to do that, then we as leaders have to shift that discussion. We have to be the ones to center it. We have to be courageous enough to have those tough conversations, to make the changes to the building code that demonstrate in real uncertain terms that we are centering the health and healing of our planet before anything else. Once we do that, I think all of the other systems will start to fall in line. I'm literally an eternal optimist.
Appreciate that, Laura May. Jennifer, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think that developers would be, I mean, they might say that at the outset because they don't, well, maybe they don't want to do it. But in my experience working in the private sector, all the business community wants is certainty. So they don't want to think that they wouldn't want a government coming in, making a wholesale set of changes to the building code, and then another government coming in 4 years later and scrapping that or making another, set of changes. So I think that, our platform calls for making changes to the building code to make housing more sustainable, to be more energy efficient, to reduce carbon emissions. So I think once that, and it sounds like that's similar to the NDP platform, and I guess we'll wait to hear from the Greens. But I think once that is, once you make those changes and you just provide that certainty to the business community, they're going to get in line. They're going to do it because, I mean, there's still money to be made. And I think there's a big misconception out there that making these changes is actually going to make housing more expensive. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. Certainly it would not make ownership more expensive, at least once it comes to the operating costs of your house. In fact, if you have an energy efficient home, you've got solar panels on your roof, or you've got a Tesla battery wall in your basement, you're actually going to be saving money. On the campaign trail yesterday, I was knocking on a door of a woman who has both solar panels on her roof and a bracket mounted solar panel in her backyard that tracks with the sun. And she says that that she doesn't pay any hydro costs until February, March during the year when the temperatures get really low and solar output isn't as significant. But up until that point, she's she made those investments, and that's actually caused her electricity bills to plummet. So I don't. I think once we get that information out there, that being environmentally responsible, being energy efficient, and all of those things will actually save money in the long run, I think you can combat some of that sense that it's going to cost more.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wayne, you're up.
Okay, yes. Housing is a huge part of the emissions in the city of Kitchener, over 30%. And I really don't buy the argument that making something more sustainable or better for all of us collectively, and working out better for operating costs long term is just too expensive today. The minimum building codes are actually being reviewed at the end of this year by whoever forms government, likely from this election. And I think it's a huge opportunity to be bold, as Laura May mentioned, and really put in the standards that have long-term consequences. A lot of the buildings or housing that you see, very little, not very little, but much smaller cost than you would expect comes from building the building itself. A lot of it comes from legal system permits, the land that the building is on. So saying we can make this significantly more efficient by, for example, putting in a heat pump, but now it's too expensive and no one will want it anymore. I think the cost of housing is much more ingrained in the financialization of it than the fact that we're making it sustainable for the long term. Build it right the first time. So yeah, I don't really buy the premise.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. Thanks to all of you for your responses to that question. We have time for, I'm gonna optimistically, as Laura May has infected me with that optimism, let's see if we can get 2 more questions. And here's the next question. Does your party support bringing long-term care under the, sorry, set a timer for myself. Does your party support bringing long-term care under the Canada Health Act and applying national standards? Would they apply to home care? I think, yes, that's it. So let's go with Wayne, and then Laura May, and then Jennifer. So yeah, once again, does your party support bringing long-term care under the Canada Health Act and applying national standards? And would these apply to home care as well?
Absolutely. Long-term care, home care, that is healthcare. It's part of our healthcare. And if our federal counterparts have a standard, and it's federal, so it's going to be a minimum standard for all provinces to follow. We should at minimum follow that standard. Long-term care is healthcare. I mean, it's as simple as that, I feel. Home care is healthcare. Being able to age in place, it can be much more enriching for our older populations, but it should really follow the minimum standards that that federal government puts in place. So, and to be honest, we would probably want to do more than just the bare minimum, right? Yeah, that's it for me.
Thank you, Wayne. Laura May.
Thank you so much. I'm with you, Wayne, because I think I am getting quite excited about this. During the pandemic, I tabled a private member's bill calling for a seniors advocate in Ontario. And part of why I called for that was because I had national organizations who were reaching out to us and explaining that they were actually fighting for a national strategy to support older adults. So when these national strategies come into place, you've got to make sure that your province is ready to go. So yes, it has to fall under the national standards. Yes, we have to do more than just the bare minimum, but at least that's a starting point that says, we are centering the needs of older adults in the things that we do and in the work that we do. As much as we're talking about long-term care and home care, I also think we need to expand our understanding of what older adults want and need. I've also been approached by a lot of older adults in community who are saying, look, like my dream is not long-term care. My dream is to do other things to ensure that I thrive, whether it's going to school and getting a degree. My mommy got her degree at 79 or 36, so I can still go to Christmas dinner. I know that there are older adults who are trying to find different ways to stay healthy and strong and active, and nobody wants to be in long-term care. So yes, we've got to fix that system, make it public, national standards help, but we also have to have a broader vision, a bolder vision about ensuring that elders are provided with the love, care, and compassion that they deserve.
Thank you, Laura May. Jennifer, I believe you are up.
Thank you so much. I'm going to sound a bit like a broken record because I agree also that a national standard would be appropriate. But it also, I mean, as a bare minimum, it gives us something to work towards, but we definitely want to build on that. And I think the other thing we want to remember is that each province and territory is different, and the communities in those provinces are going to have different needs. Like delivering home care in Ontario, where it's very dense, mostly, is going to be a lot easier to deliver than it's going to be in some communities in northern Ontario or northern Northwest territories, where the distances between seniors' residences, independent residences, are going to be more considerable. So I think there is room for very much a provincial standard when it comes to home care. And I think, if it's enshrined in the Canada Health Act to ensure it happens, that's probably great, but that's just the starting point. And I think Ontario can and should do more. And I think too, there needs to be other options for seniors, like, and I think those come from more of a community building perspective rather than, government down. I mean, there's going to be communities where, my friends and I, for instance, we talk about a Golden Girls scenario because we don't want to live alone when we get old, right? We want to be around friends. And so I think, looking at, to Laura May's point, looking at other ways to support our seniors too, whether it's aging in place or whether it's coming up with a different model, is also something that we should look into.
Thank you all for your responses to that question. And our last question here, I mean, it's not the last question that we have, but just the last question we can get to. This is coming back around to a theme that has popped up a number of times in both our topics. Holy cow, it's just, I'll ignore that. The theme of truth and reconciliation, and sort of an existential question for us as for those of us who are settler Canadians. Would your party develop an Indigenous curriculum for use in Ontario schools as recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission? And you've touched on this before, some of you have. And maybe the broader question, how would your party address other recommendations from the TRC under Ontario jurisdiction? Let's go Jennifer, and then Wayne, and then Laura May. So Jennifer, you go ahead first.
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I said during when we were speaking about that question specifically, our platform does call for more programming and education on Indigenous peoples and the residential schools situation and all of those pieces. And that needs to be part of the curriculum. We need to learn about it. I mean, I know as a child of the 80s, that wasn't something I ever learned about at all. And that's terrible. We need to have that in schools. I think we also need to do more to protect Indigenous language and Indigenous cultures. Some Indigenous languages are dying out because there are no elders left to speak those languages and teach the next generation. So I think there needs to be focus on that and making sure that history isn't lost. It doesn't just die out on us. I think it's very important to keeping our province as that's what I'm looking for, as vibrant and inclusive as it can be, is to ensure that all of those pieces remain part of the curriculum. And I think there's also a commitment in our platform to start Indigenous libraries, and I think that's a great idea, because I know recently I started reading more Indigenous stories or stories by Indigenous authors, and as a sort of self-taught way to learning about our history, and it's been really helpful, and I think could help a lot of other people as well.
Thank you, Jennifer. Wayne, you're next.
Yes, in terms of TRC recommendations, education in the school, yes, we like that. It's part of what we'd want. And just working with First Nations, I guess, as a true nation to nation relationship and bringing in, I guess, their culture, bringing in their cultures and traditions in the negotiation implementation process involving all the things, land claims, treaties, resource agreements, because we want them to have the right to self-determination. And if we're working on like a stewardship model, it helps for that development of provincial resources with fair revenue sharing, because they're the ones, they're the stewards of the land. And I think in general, the Green Party does support moving closer to all the recommendations of the TRC. There's definitely places that we would love to help close, like closing gaps in housing, closing gaps in healthcare, repairing the mercury damage in grassy narrows at a minimum. And we'd work with all levels of government in order to help reach those ends and offer that truth and justice part really, as well as before even we can really go to the fun reconciliation part.
Thank you, Wayne. Laura May, you have the last word here.
Thank you so much. When it comes to Indigenous curriculum being implemented in the school system, absolutely. And in fact, very early on, I think one of the first things that the Conservative government did when they came into power in 2018 was to immediately stop the curriculum development that was happening with Indigenous leaders. And in fact, folks were on their way in from various places to come and build that curriculum. And on a Friday, or on a Monday, sorry, and on the Friday before that is when the government decided they weren't doing this anymore. They lost contracts, they lost opportunities to do other kind of work. It was pretty cruel. And so, yes, the implementation is important. Within the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's report, there are some of those calls to action that are specific to the provincial government. Our answer is yes, 100%. And also immediately implementing UNDRIP, the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous People, is also something that we've committed to do. The work is integral to every aspect of the other questions that we've been speaking about. If we don't attend to reconciliation and we don't attend to truth, I don't think that we're going to become the loving and caring community that we hope to be, but we can do it. Eternal optimism.
Thank you, Laura May. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Wayne, for being here with us, for responding to all these important questions. And yeah, condensing a lot, into a relatively short time. So appreciate your being with us today. I'll hand things back to John for a last word. And thanks again to all who joined us on the call. John.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. Just very quickly, it's my pleasure to thank everyone for coming out today. Obviously, starting with the candidates, it's a very, very busy time. Thank you for being so generous with your time and providing us with some very, very thoughtful answers on these important issues. I want to thank our 4 recorded experts who put together, I think, very thoughtful presentations on these issues. And I also want to thank them personally for their advocacy on behalf of the causes that they represent. I want to thank Ken. Thank you for being such a wonderful moderator today, Ken. I know you do a lot of work, communications work at MCC, and certainly slipped into this role very, very easily. There's a behind the scenes crowd who helped put today together. And I certainly want to thank them, all the people that supported us. And of course, I want to end by thanking all of you for tuning in. As mentioned, this session is recorded and all of you will receive a link to review and share it. It will also be posted on our website, luther.wlu.ca, under the Center for Public Ethics tab. And I'm told it's going to be up and ready by the end of the day. So for use by faith communities and others over the coming weeks. Why not certainly download or certainly look at this video, but why not also check out our website to learn more about our activities here at Luther. We have events, we have a podcast series, we have courses for you and those you love. And you can also find out ways you can support us financially and otherwise. So I hope you've enjoyed today's session. Thank you for tuning in, and please make sure people are aware that the recording will be up, and have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the sunshine.